why do you think some single women tend to, I guess the best way to put it, why do we have an issue with the concept of submission?
I think there's multiple reasons for that. I think there's been conditioning on our end, right? Post-feminism, I guess post-feminism movement. I mean, feminism is still very much alive and well today. That's essentially the society that we live in. I think there were good aspects of it to a certain extent, but I think there are also very many negative aspects that oftentimes are not addressed. And one of those aspects is how it did start to, I think it started to challenge and started to break down some of the, whether you want to call it gender roles, or some of the different understanding between men and women that were essential to maintaining a family. So now, for example, that it's a common thing that we women have heard is, everything from being able to you can go and do anything a man can do, right? Like almost this idea of equality being mixed for sameness.
Right.
And how now you have this push in sometimes where it's like, no, men and women, they are the same. They are the same. And like that being a new conversation. Yeah. I'm looking at it and I'm just like, we're obviously not. If we were to all just stand in a room and take off our shirts or whatever, we would clearly see that we're not the same.
There are differences.
But apart from that, if we have been conditioned as young girls to grow up and believe I can do anything a man can do, right? And then if we look at the different way men are even portrayed in the media, in certain scenarios, even just if I think of some of the top soap operas and top movies and romance novels, it's very feminist leading. It's very much, it is a very female-centered approach. So it's like we've had all these messages that I think we have been fed for a long time. And we're in a culture where it's very okay and very acceptable to challenge, to discredit men to a certain extent. And like I said, I'm not saying that as a way where, you're supposed to just hide things under the rug. Like obviously if there's abuse and obviously if there are bad things going on, yeah, that should be addressed. But I think some of these things, they've swung so in the other far direction that now as a result, you have a woman growing up being like, I can do anything a man can do. I should be able to go and get a job or get a career or do whatever. I can delay marriage. I can delay being a child, and I can. It's almost like we're competing. I can literally do everything that a man can do. And so now, if that's the culture that we live in, where there is no submission, there isn't this idea of submission. It's more the idea is more, hey, women, do you boss up, level up, do your own thing, live your own best life, focus on you. The same message they would give men. If that's what you're hearing, how all of a sudden are you going to get into marriage and then now purposefully put yourself in a position to where you are relinquishing control, or you're relinquishing rights to a certain scenario? That goes completely against everything that you've ever been taught. Right. So I think that is a big component of it. If you as a woman think that everything about you is equal, or the same to the man that you're in a relationship with, you're going to see no need to submit. You're going to see that as oppression. Submission really is for our benefit. It is for our protection. And as I mentioned before, God has given us all strengths and weaknesses. He's given us boundaries, and we can look at those boundaries in two ways. We could see it as, oh, this is holding me back. This is, stifling me. This is, we can look at it wrong, or we can recognize that, like, hey, if God is a God of love, He created me. He knows my strengths and weaknesses. This boundary could be for my safety. And I would argue that it is. Yes. We are not all knowing. We are not perfect. Like, we have limitations. And so again, those boundaries that God sets, those things where He says, hey, yield this, give this to me. That is God basically saying, this is a limitation that you have, and I want to bless you by alleviating you of this struggle. I want to bless you by alleviating you of this burden. So if we recognize that submission is learning that, okay, this is an area where I want to have control, and I cannot, because God didn't create me to. Instead, I'm going to trust, and I'm going to give this area over to God and allow God to bless it, allow God to breathe into it. I think that's where we start to really grow in our faith. And like I said, you doing that with somebody that snores, gets in the American Times, says the wrong thing, you don't think it's spiritual enough all the time, like that really requires a trust in God and looking at God every single day and being like, okay, I'm here, you're here with me. Like, but you're still God. You're the one that set up this hierarchy. I didn't.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think so. If we just take the fear out of submission and say submission is for our protection and for our security, it's not for our controlling, and also recognizing that if you get a man, not saying he's going to be perfect, but if you get a man who is honestly submitted to God or seeking to do so, then that should remove any fear anyways. Because at that point, now you know you and that man are before God. Right. And God's all up in that process, so you can't fail when that happens.
Yeah.